Welcome to today's Global Connections program. I'm Bill Miller. What is the African Youth Movement? What is the African Youth Movement doing to provide technical assistance in the area of education, agriculture, and technology? We'll be back in just a moment to talk about these and other important issues. Welcome back to our program. Today we're taking a look at the African Youth Movement, which is operating in about 8 countries in Western Africa. And we're going to focus upon some of the really unique services they provide to help youth. My guest today is an expert on the African Youth Movement. My guest today is Dr. Stella Obilor. Dr. Obilor obtained her Bachelor of Medis, Bachelor of Surgery from the University of Calabar, Cross River State in Nigeria in 2003. Dr. Obilor has a Master of Public Health from Walden University, and Dr. Obilor represents the African Youth Movement in the New York area. Dr. Stella Obilor, welcome to today's Global Connections program.
Thank you, Bill.
I appreciate you being with me. Let's get right into the African Youth Movement. Okay. What is it about? When was it formed? Why was it formed? Who is the head of it?
Thank you very much for the question. The African Youth Movement is a non-governmental organization that was formed 2002. The origin in Nigeria, Akwa Ibom State in Nigeria. And the leader, president of that youth organization is Robert Uwem from Akwa Ibom State in Nigeria. We had a mission, we had a vision for the African youth. We believe that a lot of the African youth could not speak their voices. They are from the minority communities. So the main vision of this organization is to empower the African youth and make them realize that there is no country that will have a good economy without having the youth empowerment. So that is the main motive, to produce African youth that could stand the test of time all over the world, globally. Empower them through education, ecosystem, agriculture, and also to make sure that these are well-developed youth that could have innovations to stand anywhere in the world they go to.
Exactly.
That is the mission we have.
And that is so important, especially to work with young people, because they are the leaders of tomorrow.
That's what it is.
Exactly. And if our viewers would like more information on the African Youth Movement, they can go to www.aym-inc.org and get a lot more information. I'm glad you mentioned too about the areas that you're focusing upon, because I think it would be helpful if we could give a specific example very briefly. We could go through them. The ones that you and I have talked about, for example, you're providing assistance in roughly 8 Western African countries. And what is one of the things you're doing in technology? We'll just start with technology.
Oh yeah, thank you. It is very important that we are starting with technology, because we believe one of the reasons that we are really good in letting this African youth be developed is because the Millennium Development Goals could not be met without the youth being developed, without youth empowerment and employment. So in technology, we are bringing it through science education and technology, because most of the youth are not educated, mostly when it comes to science and technology. I can give you a good example, like in Nigeria. We partnered in 2003 with the Minister of Science and Technology to provide mobile technology classes and science classes for the minority groups, those who could not afford education in any form. So it was like our advocacy and lobby that got that initiative established, even as we speak now. So there are mobile classes that they use audiovisual to teach the students about science innovations that could bring about development in the country. Because a lot of times people believe that education is too much of expenses, but then come to think about it, it's also a revenue generating aspect of any country, because you have your youth developed, you have good innovations, and then you can use what you have put into youth to develop your country. So in terms of technology, we have done pretty much enough through science education, educating these people through the audio technology, or the visual and audio technology, so that when you see any African youth, it's not going to be like 100 years ago, when African youth has never seen what it means to have a computer, whereby an African youth comes, he won't even know how to use any of the gadgets. But today, we have best brands in technology, thanks to African youth movement, because of the way we started, and today we can reap the fruits of our labor. Most of our youth are doing very well in technology and science. Because of the lobby and advocacy through us, we were able to penetrate the government and let them spend up to 10% of their economy on technology to make sure that our youth will be well educated and developed, so that it doesn't matter that you are from Nigeria, you can be developed and work elsewhere, like US or anywhere you find yourself. And then they say charity begins at home. When you are well developed, you will be a good benefit to your country and the rest of the nation, and even internationally wise.
Exactly, and those are vital skills to have. Another area that you focus upon is entrepreneurship. Of course, computers tie right into that. What are you doing in the area of entrepreneurship?
Wonderful. It's a good thing you brought that up, because in the entrepreneurship, the African youth movement, we have partnered with a lot of small-scale businesses, because there are obviously people who could not do so much in education. But then we don't want that minority group be without any innovation. So in the entrepreneurship, we lobby and get resources from community banks, from commerce banks, to set up small-scale businesses for this young youth who are very talented, who have the skills. Because I believe that the skills in them, if you harness the skills that African child has, they could put it, in a long way to become businessmen and women that could run the country and bring about development and growth in economy. So we are like their voices. We speak to get them the funds that they need in their entrepreneurship to set up small-scale businesses that could go a long way into the development of the country.
Exactly. And something like a micro-loan can
mean a
tremendous amount of help.
That's
a very small
correct.
Amount can
because
really
most of them, what happened that we realize is this. Some people want to start up a business, but they don't know how to go about it. Either they don't have the collateral to get them the loan they need from these commerce banks or even community banks. So through us, this has been able to happen. We saw the fund from the community banks, from the commerce banks, and set up those that show interest, because we don't want to give it out to people who would not use it meaningfully. So we control and make sure that all these resources are channeled to the youth and develop and use them also into the other resources that we need in some of the events that the youth movement is doing.
Exactly. And you're the representative for the African youth movement in the New York City area. Who are some of your partners, both in the United States and also in the countries where you're operating, 8 or so Western African countries? You mentioned the governments. Obviously, you work with them. You have other folks, but are there UN agencies? Are there non-governmental organizations, private sector folks, corporations? Not all of them, but we're just maybe an example or two.
All right. We have partners that's both in Nigeria, in Sierra Leone, Guinea, West African countries. We're also lucky to have some international partnership, like we have a United Nations empowerment program. We also partner with United Nations international strategy on risk reduction. Risk reduction. Very, very a good, strong partnership we have. The World Bank is also one of our partners. Even back home in the government, Nigerian government, the Niger Delta Development Commission, and the National Universities Commission, because this is where we are working through the universities, where the development of this youth begin. So they are a huge partnership with us. And also we have partnership with the GATSSI, that is Global Advocacy on toilet and sanitary standard initiative. That is a major partner that we have. Through that, we are trying to make sure we take care of the fecal-oral infections that come through, substandard sanitary initiatives.
Exactly. And that is such an important service. We in the United States or Canada or perhaps Europe or parts of Asia, or parts of Africa too, take for granted because we've always had sanitary facilities and toilets.
Exactly.
It's something I'm not sure of the statistics, like 40% of the people, the 7 billion people on planet Earth, do not have access to toilet facilities, which can be an absolute disaster, especially from the health standpoint. And speaking of health, the one thing we've been reading a lot about lately is the horrific Ebola virus that's really picking up steam in Nigeria, Guinea, Sierra Leone. This is a major health problem. You're in the health field, you're a health expert.
Yes.
What is the current status of the Ebola virus, and why should we look at it and really try to involve ourselves in making sure that this does not spread and that we contain it and reduce it and stop it?
Thank you very much, Mr. Bill. You brought out a point that is very passionate to me, and that is the infectious diseases that we have. And for example, the Ebola outbreak that is going on right now, that was started in Guinea, Sierra Leone, and then now Nigeria. I believe, like WHO mentioned on 8th of August, they have declared Ebola an international threat. It is a matter of international threat right now because for someone who has Ebola in Nigeria, might travel from Nigeria to the United States. So it becomes an international problem. That is why everybody should put hands on deck to make sure that most people don't get infected by Ebola disease, because the more people are coming down with Ebola disease, they are traveling across the border because of international traveling, and they are carrying the Ebola disease to other countries that are not affected, and then the infections will keep on going on and on. The first case of this Ebola that was diagnosed was 40 years ago. But in the history of Ebola disease, there has never been such an outbreak, such as this we are having in 2014. That is to tell you that there is a resurgence of those infectious diseases that public health has had success on. They are coming back due to one thing or the other. So our stand is that the international community should help even the developing countries right now as it is to fight these diseases, because it's an international concern. It's an international threat. It deserves international concern. So back home in Nigeria, the way you might control someone who comes down with Ebola in the United States here might be quite different from the way someone who comes down with Ebola in Nigeria will be treated. Because our health infrastructure is not as strong as it is in the developed countries. And this is such a disease that someone comes down with Ebola needs strict isolation and maintenance to make sure that it is not communicated into another person. At the hemorrhagic stage, when the person is very infectious, you want to keep that person away from the other people who are not infected yet. And even the health workers protect themselves also, because they are the first group of people that could get the disease from their patients. But back home, that is why my heart bleeds right now, because we don't have such protective measures back home. So it becomes even more threatening. That is why it calls for international help before the outbreak becomes epidemic and pandemic. They should give help as much as they could. President Jonathan is doing so much, but how much could be good enough for an emergency of this capacity, for an outbreak of this large? So everybody should work towards it to make sure that it doesn't spread internationally. Otherwise, it's going to be a disaster.
Well, you're watching Global Connections Television, which is an independently produced program. The opinions expressed on Global Connections are solely those of the moderator and his guest. Today, we're taking a look at the African youth movement, and my guest is an expert on the AYM. My guest today is Dr. Stella Obilor. Dr. Obilor has a Master of Public Health from Walden University, and she represents the African youth movement in the New York area. We're talking about diseases, and of course the Ebola virus is horrific. We've also seen another disease and a program, but the polio virus ravaged the earth for decades and decades and decades. And today we see that there's a Polio Plus program. It's in effect. started primarily by Rotary International, then the United Nations World Health Organization, UN Children's Fund, the U.S. Centers for Disease Control signed on, and many other groups too, governments and what have you. And today, we've gone from like 350,000 cases a year of polio down to just a handful, really about 40, 50, 60, something like that, which is just absolutely remarkable. And now it's been localized in just Nigeria, Afghanistan, and Pakistan are the only areas, and India has been polio-free for the last 2 or 3 years, which is really remarkable. But you're right, everybody has to focus on it, and if you don't kill the polio virus or destroy the Ebola virus, it will ravage the earth to a large degree. Well, let's move on to another topic. We have so many we can talk about today. One before the program, you were talking about, you mentioned a very interesting activity or program or project, the Transformation Agenda. What exactly is that?
Oh, wonderful. Thank you very much. Transformation Agenda, it is agenda that our president, Nigerian President Goodluck Ebere Jonathan, is using to bring a transformation into Nigerian government by setting up policies, projects, and programs that will be consistent in development. Because before he came into the office, the major problem that Nigeria had was that there hasn't been consistency in development. There has been a lot of abandoned projects, the policies that weren't implemented. And I begin to ask, of what good are policies if they're not implemented? Of what benefits are law if they're not enforced? So when he came into office, he saw the stage it was. There was no system. It was a kind of system failure. So he initiated this agenda to make sure that all those policies that weren't working will be put into a collaboration. So it's going to be a kind of a transformation from the status quo, which was every revenue and income Nigeria had came from oil. So Jonathan Goodluck looked at it and said, no. To use. He revived agricultural practices, turned it over to mechanized farming. He looked into cash crops. Right now, as I speak with you, Nigeria is becoming the world leader in production of food. So he went into that to harness all these other resources that have been looked down upon before. He did a lot of transformations because I believe that for any economy to grow, there must be stability and accountability. So these factors he brought into his transformation agenda. He revived the international airport, the free trading zone, and right now the investment has increased by 500 million into the investment that Nigeria had before. So this president is bringing in transformation that will reach out to different sectors, different other resources, instead of letting everybody keep their hope on oil. Nigeria is going to do better if we focus on other resources other than oil and gas. And that he has achieved tremendously within 3 to 4 years that he came on board. A lot of people, we have beginning to appreciate him now as a great transformer, as a servant leader, as someone who could set up a mission and not worried about what you feel about the vision, because he believes that people are resistant to change. If you're a leader and you are worried about resistance from people, you will not go far. For him, he is a crowd puller. He sets up this vision, he puts it across to you, he brings the numbers to table, because that is what is very remarkable about him. He want to tell you, okay, when I came into office, the GPD was 1.5, but right now in my regime is 7.5. That is a number that I'm bringing to show that the transformation is working. We want to know what it was before and what it is now. And if you look at before and after and why he is in the office, you know that the transformation agenda is working. Youth empowerment, education, because everybody, they have come to realize that before it used to be education, we are spending so much on our kids' education, not realizing that there is no other sector in any economy that will give you revenue such as education. You train these children, make them to become innovative, and they will turn around to develop the growth, to increase in the growth and economy of that country. So that is what the transformation is all about. It's transforming from what used to be that wasn't working to what is now working, and into empowerment of the youth, bringing back women into politics, because women were so marginalized before the transformation agenda. But right now, women's voices are being heard in Nigeria, in political regime. Women are now heard and seen. Before, they were just heard about, but they weren't seen in the scene. But right now, we have great political leaders that are women, and that is one good thing that transformation has done, which I appreciate.
Exactly. That's helping to achieve the Millennium Development Goal number 3, to empower women, which is very important. And I think what you're talking about, too, is a lesson for really for every country in the world, but also for communities. You look at towns and villages or what have you in the United States or in Latin America or the African continent, the African countries. So often they rely upon one industry. And what you're talking about is diversification. Whereas if you have a downturn in the market, if you have a natural resource that becomes depleted or there's no longer a demand for it, that you will have the opportunity to offset that loss of revenue by having some other industry. But diversification is extremely important, I think, for everybody. It's a good lesson to learn. But before we run out of time, I do want to mention another group we've been hearing about, Boko Haram. We've heard about this group, a very militant group that's in Nigeria that's been kidnapping young women and that type of thing. How is Nigeria dealing with this issue, and what can the world, the United Nations is fighting terrorism, various countries are fighting terrorism, but what can be done to provide assistance to Nigeria in dealing with Boko Haram?
Thank you, Mr. Bill. You mentioned a very critical and sensitive matter, which is terrorism in Nigeria as it stands right now, the Boko Haram issue. It has been such overwhelming crisis for Nigeria as a whole. The Goodluck Jonathan, our president, Nigerian president, has done so well in taking care of terrorism. But one thing I want to bring up here is terrorism. It's a global threat that demands global intervention. That is to say that even though this president has given all he could, we still need help, international support to fight this terrorism. Because a terrorism in one country puts another country also in a big and huge threat. So it is not something that should be left alone for one country to take care of. Nigeria, on our own part, we helped in crisis. You can think about the Gulf War. We sent our troops when it was happening around the corner. Even the Liberian War, we participated so much through our leaders. So right now, we are also beckoning on international community to not let us alone suffer what we are going through, the kidnapping of the Chibok girls and all other crises that is going on through the terrorism. We need intervention from the global community, because Goodluck Jonathan, our president, has given all he could. Right now, it is a concern that should be thrown open in the international community. And we need such support so that he can fight the terrorism and make sure that the lives of our people are protected. Security should be the #1 target for every country. Security matters, the safety. If your people are not safe, what other sustainable development are we talking about? So safety comes very, very first on all other agenda.
Exactly. And this is an issue that we all have to, these issues that you're talking about today are so absolutely critical. We have to deal with them. In the last 30 seconds, and we're down to the clock now, what do you see, just in a sentence or two, as the #1 issue that the African youth movement will be dealing with, their #1 challenge, and perhaps for Africa, for Nigeria, as we move into well into the 21st century, just very briefly?
Yeah, as we move into the 21st century, like the African youth movement, we are trying to make sure that more income is being spent on our youth education. Because youth empowerment, youth education is going to help towards the achievement of Millennium Development Goals and even the Sustainable Development Goals. Because if the youth are not developed, if the youth are not given so much, so to say, that they could bring a kind of transformation in empowerment and even in employment, it's going to be a disaster. And we beckon, as we fight this fight, even with our government, asking for resources so that we could take care of the events that we have lined up to help our youth, to help them even impact not only on their education, to impact on health.
We see health as a social justice. I myself, I am an agent of change. I believe that everybody should have should have right to quality health and best practices. So that is the way the world should see it, to come to the aid of this young African youth that could not help themselves. We speak the voices of those desperate children who could not speak their voice. So that is why we are here today. And we're also asking that the international community should help in the transformational agenda that Goodluck Jonathan, the president of Nigeria, has set apart. So that when Nigeria stands, all Africans will stand, because Nigeria is the giant of Africa. We need the help from international community. Otherwise, if Africa fails, the economy of Nigeria, if the economy of Nigeria fails, the economy of Africa will fail, and internationally there's going to be an impact on the economy.
That is a perfect way to end it, Dr. Stella Obilor. Your passion is absolutely fascinating, and these issues are very important, and you do need international support, and I'm sure that you will get it. But your refreshing voice to let us know some of the positive things happening in Nigeria and Africa. But I want to thank you so very much for a very interesting and a very informative program.
Thank you, Mr. Bill.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
I'm Bill Miller. Thank you for joining us on today's Global Connections program.